Everybody, thanks for attending our webinar on CMMC. If you're an MSP, why should you care? And are you in scope? And all the other good things that we're going to talk about. We're going to wait about another minute because people are rapidly coming in. So stand by and we'll get started in about another 60 seconds. Okay, I'll let people continue to come in, but we will get started. Appreciate, again, everybody attending today. Today's presentation is not going to be going through every control or all that good stuff. What we're going to talk about is, what is CMMC? What are the couple of levels that you need to be concerned with? More importantly, are you in scope? What do you do? How do you talk to a customer? What's important? What's not important? So my two guests today are both certified assessors. And certified assessor means that they can do complete readiness assessments to get you ready for audits. So I'll let them introduce themselves. Mr. Kevin, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, I'm Kevin Hutchinson. I'm the VP of Cybersecurity Services. I head up our Cybersecurity Services division at IGI. It's everything from physical security, pen testing, risk assessment, CMMC compliance, basically anything in a compliance or cybersecurity framework. I'm responsible for that within our organization. I've been in IT for 30 years, number of certifications, including CMMC certifications, and that's enough about me. Let me hand it over to Wayne.
Well, before I hand it over to Wayne, I forgot to mention, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please go to the box that say questions, type them in there, and we will answer all of them at the end. And if we run over time, you want to stay, we'll continue answering them. So, Mr. Proctor, why don't you introduce yourself to the nice people?
Okay. Hey, everybody. Wayne Proctor. My background is information security leadership. I've been the CISO for 7 companies, the largest being UPS internationally. I'm now really happy working with IGI, helping companies to mature their security programs. I am a CMMC Certified Assessor, and I'm helping a lot of companies now to mature their programs towards compliance with CMMC. So if we can move the slide forward, we'll jump right in. Okay, before we start talking about these boxes you see on the slide, I just wanted to make sure we all had a little bit of background information about CMMC. First, I want to start talking about 2 classification terms of FCI and CUI, because we're going to use this throughout the presentation. So FCI is federal contractor information, or federal contract information, and that is really any information about a contract that is not public. So if you're working on a contract for actually any part of the government, and that contract and the information about it isn't public, then you have FCI. And there's what they call a baseline set of controls that are needed to be put in place to protect FCI. And there's also CUI is the term we're going to talk about the most, and that's controlled unclassified information. And that's really any information that it's not classified, but it's information that is very sensitive that the government doesn't want shared. And we're going to be talking about this because we're going to be talking about CMMC. We're going to be talking about this in reference to the DoD, because it's the DoD that is really owns the CMMC program. So CUI is any information that's sensitive, that the government doesn't want shared, that is maybe about government facilities, locations, weapons, any component of those weapons or their programs. It really covers a lot of different contractors out there. There's an estimated 80,000 contractors that can somehow participate in programs that involve CUI. So it's a really big scope. So just to give you a little history, how we got here with the need for CMMC is that starting in the early 2000s, the government had more and more concerns about this CUI information. And at the time, it was called different things. It was all throughout the government. There weren't any set controls. So back then, the government actually said, oh, let's call everything CUI. And then NIST, this was in 2015, NIST published a security framework called SP 800-171. And that was specifically and is specifically a security framework for the protection of CUI that's in contractor systems. So that specifically relates to, you know, this potential 80,000 contractors out there that help the DoD with contracts that involve CUI. And what they did is, because they came out with this framework, the government said, okay, what we're going to do, and the DoD was the ones to implement this. They said in their DFAR program, all the contracts awarded that are for contracts involving CUI, we're going to put a clause in all the contracts to say, you, Mr. Contractor, must be compliant with the 800-171 controls. So as contractors signed those contracts, they were saying they're going to be compliant. But what happened is that through different kinds of audits and checks of the program, it was found that contractors weren't all taking that seriously and not implementing all those controls. There was no one auditing them. There were no real penalties. So, you know, it just wasn't done. So what happened is that really people realized in the government, especially in DoD, they realized that we need some kind of program to validate if people are really doing this. And that's how they came up with the CMMC program. So now we're talking about what's really on the slide here. And the CMMC program is to validate that the NIST 100-171 controls are implemented effectively. And they're to protect, they're all to protect the confidentiality of FCI and CUI. So that's really what the program's all about. And why I specify confidentiality is because us that deal with security a lot, we know that you're usually in a security program are worried about confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. The CUI program and the 800-171 is concerned strictly with the confidentiality of the information, really making sure that people that aren't supposed to have that information don't get it. So that's what the whole program's about. How can we validate that contractors are actually doing this? So now I'm going to explain, kind of go across the screen to explain what CMMC is really about. So the 800-171 controls are pretty in-depth. There's 110 different practices or controls, and under each of those controls are at one or more objectives. There's 320 different objectives total. The objectives under each control are things like, did you document your controls? Did you get management approval? Did you implement a control to enforce it? So there's a lot of different facets about how to implement each control that are described in the objectives. If one objective fails in a control, then the whole control fails. And you have to have every single one of the 110 different practices or controls implemented so that to be certified. So if you have just one objective, it could lead you to fail your entire assessment. So it's a pretty serious program. One thing to keep aware as you go through the program, as your customers go through the program to become compliant, everything has to be done at the objective level. So all those 320 different objectives, you need to collect evidence of each one of those. You need to write your documentation to explain what you're doing on each one of those objectives. Just keep that in mind, that that's really when you have an assessment, the assessor is going to look at the objective level. And what we're saying in the next one is that you do, to become level 2 certified, you need to have an assessment done by a C3 PAO, and that's your assessor, and that's the group that's allowed to say you're certified. But the assessment, once you get that, it is good for 3-year period. And the 3-year period, even though it happens every 3 years, you need to have your assessments or your controls in place continually. So what the DoD requests is that every year an authorizing executive in your company signs off that you're still compliant. So you have to turn in an attestation.
I don't mean to interrupt, but someone did ask a question that I think is relative. How do you know if one of your clients needs to be level 1 or level 2? And how can an MSP help them, A, understand that, or B, help them with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. For the level 1, if you have a government contract and for now we're talking about the DoD, but if you have a contract with the DoD and that contract is not fully public information, which almost none of them are, then you have FCI. So you have to definitely be level 1. If you are any CUI, and now because of the CMMC program, every contract that has CUI will say you need to be compliant with CMMC. So if you have that line in your contract, then you need to be level 2. And if you're level 2, that covers level 1 also, because the level 1 controls are built into level 2. So really, the main thing for this conversation is to look at your contract. If your contract says you have to be compliant with CMMC, then you need the level 2.
What about if I'm just doing a bid? If I'm doing a bid for, if I've got a client and they want to do a bid for a federal government contract, or I'm an MSP and I'm bidding on something, with the DoD, does that automatically mean I have to be level 1 right there since I've seen the information in a contract?
Yeah, the customer or the company that's trying to become the contractor and win the bid for that contract, they need to be CMMC compliant before they win the bid. So you can participate in trying to get the business, but you will never be awarded the business until you're certified as CMMC.
Okay, so at this point, because it sounds like a bid, unless it discloses tons of secret information, is FCI. And if you haven't at least done level 1 attestation, you probably shouldn't even bother to bid, because you need to have done that in order to win the bid. Would that be correct?
Yeah, you really need to have at least your level 1 to be able to win any kind of bid. It is, like you said, a self-attestation, but you could have penalties if you say you're level 1, you're really not. But yeah, if you self-attest, then you're at least level 1.
Thank you. Okay, next slide, Norm.
Yeah, so yeah, I had just a little bit more just to finish up there, Matt. But one thing just to keep in mind, you guys are going to hear a lot about a need for an SSP. So your system security plan is the most important document of the whole process. So without that, you can't do anything. It's really, just think of it as a description of your whole security program. And what just came up on the bottom of the screen is about some of the penalties you could face, why you don't want to attest that you're compliant if you're not. And you'll see on the bottom here, some of those penalties. So there's civil penalties that you can have. And the civil penalties are, roughly $13,000 to $28,000 each. And it's really per invoice you sent. So every invoice you sent, you may get that penalty if you're found not to have the controls in place. On top of that, there's treble damages. And treble damages, think of it as triple damages, but that's triple the total recovery amount. So in general, there's a lot of stipulations to this we're not going to go into today. But in general, the total damages are how much you've billed the DoD. So if you billed the DoD $1 million, then treble would be 3 times the $1 million. So it adds up pretty quick. And I know before this, Kevin, we were talking about some examples of this, and I think you had something you can share.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. I've got a great example. So just in July of last year, the DOJ entered a settlement with Aero Turbine Inc. And there's a couple of things here that are really critical to note. Aero Turbine Inc. had a PE company that was a major investor. They were a major shareholder. Well, as a result of their position and because of the actions of an employee of the PE company was brought into the suit. Even though they were upstream, they were brought into the suit. Bottom line is they settled with the federal government for $1.75 million. And again, this is just as of last year. And that settlement was because they did not meet the CMMC compliance that they said they were meeting.
Yeah, good example. And there's a lot of examples out there. You guys can go and search and you'll see examples of penalties. They're becoming more frequent. The last thing I want to mention about the penalties is that there's incentives for somebody to report if you or your customer trying to become CMMC compliant. If they say they're compliant, they're not compliant, they don't have all the controls in place. So anyone that reports them, that's called a whistleblower, but the incentives are 15 to 30% of that total recovery amount. So in our example I made, if the amount of the total recovery was the $1 million, you could be looking at a whistleblower at getting, roughly 300,000 for yourself. So you got some really big incentives there to report people that are falsely claiming that the controls are in place. So hopefully, I know that took a while, but hopefully that got us all on the same page as far as what CMMC is and how important it is and serious. So now I just want to hand this over to Kevin. He's going to talk about what this means to you as an MSP.
Wayne, if MSPs are our target audience today, we want to answer the question of why does it apply to you and when are you in scope? So you may think, oh, well, my customer deals with the Department of War. I don't do anything, but I manage some systems for them or I provide some tech support. Well, that could put you in scope. Your customer is the one who's going to have to determine whether or not the services you provide are in scope for CMMC. So it's things like, do you have access to file servers or other systems that your customer stores CUI on? If so, you're in scope. Do any administrative functions from your organization as an MSP administer systems that store, process, or transmit that CUI? If you're in scope. Do you operate security systems like a SIM? You're going to be in scope because that data is considered CUI. Do you have any other administrative access or do you host machines that may contain CUI? Any of those things are going to bring you into scope. But again, it's going to be up to your customer to define what that is. They have to define that scope, and then they're going to say whether or not you're in that scope. If you don't want to be considered in scope, if you don't have any access to any of their assets that are storing or transmitting, processing CUI, you shouldn't be in scope. If you're providing services only through a jump host or VDI environment that your customer controls, shouldn't be in scope. And then if you're providing advisory services or consulting services without privileged access, you shouldn't be in scope.
So am I correct in assuming, based on what you just said, that as an MSP, my customer is the one who has to determine what is in scope and what isn't? That's not on me. I can work with them on it, but it's their definition of what's in scope based on their readiness, assessment, everything like that, to decide what we're in scope with and what we're not. That's not my responsibility as an MSP, correct?
Correct. Your customer has to define it because your customer is the one who's seeking that CMMC level 2 certification. So they have to define what the parameters are. What are the systems that host CUI? Who are the people that can access CUI? So all of that is determining what the scope is for their CMMC level 2 environment.
Okay, so we can help them, but it's not our responsibility, if you will.
Right.
Yeah. One thing of interest is just that a lot of times people will say, well, how do I get started? What's my first step? And no matter how you phrase that question, defining your scope is always the first step. Some people say, well, we should do a gap assessment to find out what we don't have in place. But in reality, you can't do a gap assessment unless you understand the scope.
Okay.
Spot on. Thanks, Wayne. All right, let's go to the next slide. So as an MSP, why should you care about CMMC? Well, number one, it's going to open up opportunities for you to generate more revenue. So there are about 80,000 companies that provide services to the DoD. That's really called the Defense Industrial Base. Okay. Out of those, it's an estimated 35 to 50,000 companies that need contractors, or those contractors need to become level 2 compliant, and they need MSP services. So that's how you're going to create stickiness and gain access to this environment to generate more revenue for your organization. CMMC certification, you're going to have it if you're going to win those DoD engagements. We talked about that earlier. You want to bid on a DoD contract, as your customer does. Okay, great. The contract's likely going to have, you must be CMMC level 2 compliant to be awarded the contract. So as an MSP, you can assist your customer in that process, get them level 2 certified, make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row, you've got all your documentation you need to support them when they get ready to go through that assessment. That creates some stickiness for you, because if that customer decides, well, we may want to look at another MSP, tap the brakes. They are likely going to have to go through another level 2 certification, which could cost them $25,000 to $50,000. Plus they have to get all of the documentation from their new MSP, and it really becomes an uphill battle and a headache, and could subject them to potentially losing a contract. So once you're in with that customer, there's a great likelihood that you can retain that customer for several years, just because you've assisted them with that CMMC level 2 compliance, and they don't want to have to spend $25,000, $50,000 plus to go find somebody else to provide services for them.
I like it. So it's like going fishing, have a fish on a hook really good, reeling them in, and they ain't going anywhere for now.
You got it. So what are your responsibilities as an MSP? Well, let's talk about what the customer has to do. They have to achieve and maintain CMMC certification, right? They're going to define assessment scope. Like Wayne said, that's the first thing that they need to do. They have to define that scope. Where does the FCI live? Where does the CUI live? And then how are they going to control that environment? What do their policies look like? What do their procedures look like? Do they have the paperwork mapped out properly with their MSP, so they know what the MSP's responsibilities are, what my responsibilities are as a customer, and are the controls effective? As an MSP, you may be managing and operating the security tools. You're providing admin support. You're going to have to provide evidence of those controls and their effectiveness. You need to make sure that you're securing the environment that you're working in for your customer, and it's meeting the security requirements that the government has defined, like FIPS encrypted communications between you and your customer. You're going to have to provide your customer with a shared responsibility matrix. So you're going to have to document all of the controls, all of the things that you do for your customer, and how you're meeting CMMC compliance requirements for that customer. And to support the OSC during the assessment, the OSC is your customer, the organization seeking certification. When they come in for an assessment, it's likely that the auditing company, that C3PAO, is going to want to talk to you as the MSP about all of your in-scope controls. Wayne, do you want to add anything?
It's just something great to keep in mind that, during the assessment, if your customer is going through the assessment, you're in scope. If you have those controls, like Kevin said, you're going to be asked to participate in those interviews. And it's a bit of administration to provide these documents and go through those interviews. But we're going to talk about that on the next few slides. Okay. So here I wanted to talk to you about, a real primary question that we're focusing on this presentation. Should you become CMMC compliant? So you don't have to be CMMC compliant to help your customer become CMMC compliant. But you do have to, like we said in the last slide, provide that responsibility matrix. You have to provide evidence, so a lot of it's, screen prints, copies, printouts. You have to provide evidence to your customer so they can get certified of any of the controls that you're involved in operating. You also need to go through those interviews. So there's a lot of work to do, and you have to do that work for every single one of your customers that's trying to become compliant. Go all through those assessments. So if you have multiple customers that are trying to become certified, it would be a benefit to you administratively to become compliant yourself. Because if you're compliant, the C3PAO, the assessor, can take your certification and your customer can inherit the controls. So basically you've been proven compliant. So now your customer and you can save time going forward. So you don't have to go through every single assessment, every single interview, and all this work. So it's a great benefit to you to become compliant if you're going to be going through this for multiple customers. Another thing do you want to consider becoming compliant yourself is that it's very appealing to these customers. We talked about 80,000 customers that the government estimates are going to need to become CMMC level 2 compliant. And we talked about an estimate of up to 50,000 of those companies are going to need an MSP. So in that process, all those companies are going to ideally want to work with an MSP that is certified. And if you are certified, there's actually places like we talk about here, the MSP Collective. You can go to their website yourself and see that site lists the MSPs that are CMMC compliant. When we were putting this presentation together, just last week, there were only 43 CMMC certified MSPs. So if a customer goes there, these 50,000 companies that need to get certified and need an MSP, if they go out there and see, there's a very small list of MSPs that are certified, I'd really prefer working with one of them. So you're really putting yourself in a very small set of MSPs that customers will want to work with. The other reason is if you want to bid on a DoD contract yourself, that may not be the case. But if for some reason you did want to have a contract directly with the DoD, it's very likely that you'll be working with CUI. So you would definitely need to become CMMC compliant if you want to have your own contract. Then in that case, you would be the OSC.
So with prospects, if I'm understanding this correct, if I as an MSP or CMMC compliant, I'm attractive to them because since they can inherit my controls, does that save them money and time on their audit?
Yeah, definitely. The whole process goes quicker. It's better for the customer, much better for the MSP because they save.
I basically have an offer now. If one of my clients needs to do that, or a prospect where I can come in and say, guess what? I'm already compliant. You can inherit my controls. I just cut down your time and your money that needs to be spent in order to have that done.
Yeah, very well said.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now we're going to take some questions. I've got a few up here. We've got a few that were submitted ahead of time. However, if you have questions, if you didn't hear before, if you have questions, put them into the question box and we will get to everybody's questions. If for some reason we need to go over to answer everybody's questions, that's fine. You're more than welcome to leave it too, and we'll keep going until everybody's questions are answered. So there was a slide in the beginning that had SSP on it. What does SSP stand for?
That's the system security plan. So it's really broken down into a few sections. In the beginning, you define your scope. You say, well, what is my scope? What assets do I have? How do my networks function? How does my data flow through my environment? And in the majority of the document, you say, how are you complying with every single one of the CMMC objectives? And you say, not only how am I complying, but who is responsible for each one? That's where this C3 PAO will get the list of who they want to interview. And then what kind of evidence do I have for each of those controls? So it's really a guidebook that, the C3 PAO is going to be using nonstop during the assessment. So I would suggest to start that the minute you start working on your CMMC program and just keep building it up. And at the end of your readiness, you'll have that document fully prepared.
So what you're saying is it sounds like a good night of drinking and filling out a lot of paperwork.
It's a lot of work, but that's why I'd spread it out. Yeah.
Okay. So we have another question. So the per violation can loosely be translated into per objective that is falsely attested?
Not necessarily. What you're looking at is, as Wayne mentioned, as soon as you sign that contract, you're telling the government you're compliant. So you submit an invoice. Let's say you submitted an invoice for $50,000, and that's your monthly bill to the government. Every month it's $50,000. Well, if they come and audit you and find that you're not compliant from the start of that contract, every invoice is subject to being a violation. So that $50,000 adds up every invoice for a year. Then on top of that, you've got to look at treble damages. How much does the government want to go after you for? And it can be real expensive. Plus, you could risk losing that contract.
So all I have to say to that is,
Pretty much.
That's all I can say that seems to have any validity there.
Yeah, one thing to note also, Matt, is the government has a system where they note things about contractors. So if they note in that system that you've had a security problem, they had a false claim act, and you were found guilty of that, that'll go in that system. And the different federal agencies, not just the DoD, but all the agencies are required to check that system before they hire a contractor. So if you are in there with that negative finding and they look there and you're one of 3 companies trying for this contract, it's very unlikely you're going to get the contract if you're the one that's in that system with a security problem.
Okay, this is a good one. I like this one. If we know we have access to CUI, and the customer claims or attests that we're out of scope, do we have a duty to report it?
So does the MSP have a?
Yes, as an MSP, we have access to CUI. We know we do. Customer says we're out of scope on their attestation. Do we have a duty as the MSP to report, wait a second, no, we have access?
Yeah, I would say that's the right thing to do by the customer. You want to let the customer know that their scope is not correct and that you do in fact have access to that CUI. Demonstrate to them that you do have access to the CUI and tell them they need to get their scope updated and corrected. And from my perspective, that shows the customer that you're looking out for their best interest. If the customer decides not to do anything with the information you've given them, now they've really got a problem if the DOJ comes knocking on their door.
Well, how, I'm going to take this a step further. So the customer says that's great and doesn't change their scope. Am I in trouble? Can I get in any trouble? Do I need to report this directly to the government then?
So you could report it to the government as a whistleblower. Maybe there's somebody in the company, in your customer's organization, that gets wind of what's going on, that maybe they were privy to the meeting and they found out that it was reported and the customer said, we're not going to do anything about it. Maybe that person goes to the government as a whistleblower. Now the company's got problems. That whistleblower is going to get paid, whether it's your organization or the whistleblower within the company, but they're going to get paid if there's claims that are paid to the government based on the violations.
Okay. So it says, I noticed that if I want to get, I'm an MSP, I want to get level 2 compliant. It says it could cost me anywhere from $75K to $250K. As an MSP that wants to reach out and bid on DoD contractor prospects or work with them, should I plan for this cost to be CMMC compliant?
Wayne, you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, planning for it is always good. I'm not sure where that number range came from and went into it. There's a wide range in prices, and it's based upon how much you already have in place and how much you have to do and your maturity and a lot of factors. But yeah, you should definitely budget, because that's just
they did a quick chat GBT search and those are the numbers that came back.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you have to be a complex environment to get that high number.
As an average MSP, average, size and everything like that, not small, not huge. I know this isn't an exact science. I totally get that. So for everybody here, this is not an exact science. But what would you estimate that cost to be for a standard, mid-size MSP?
Yeah, I see ranges from, maybe the 40,000 range to the 100 range.
Okay.
But that's for the assessment. That's what I'm talking about.
Right.
So if they're also figuring into that assessment that they probably don't have some controls in place, and they've got to put those controls in place, and maybe they have to pay for licenses and hardware, maybe that's where the high number is coming from. But I haven't seen that high number for an average MSP type environment for just the assessment.
Okay.
That's a good point about the equipment, Wayne. So one of the requirements is FIPS validated cryptography, FIPS validated encryption. If the equipment that you have doesn't support that, it's gonna be a forklift upgrade, right? You're gonna have to get new equipment that's going to meet that standard if you want to get CMMC level 2 certified. So that can add to the cost. So yeah, I agree with Wayne that depending upon your environment, there are multiple factors that could affect what that high-end number is. And it's all going to be dependent upon what does your environment look like right now.
The best approach is to define your scope, go through a readiness gap assessment, and out of that phase, you can get a much better estimate, because you'll know not only how much probably your CMMC assessment is going to be, but what controls and processes do you have to put in place.
Great point.
So if I'm an MSP for a company that's level 1, they need to be level 2, but they have no immediate plans to do that. What do we do as an MSP? I mean, is there something we should be doing? Can we get in trouble? What do you do with that?
Call us.
Well, I was going to get to that at the end, but beyond that, if they literally say, no, we're not doing it, but I know they need to be, what do I do with that? Is that something that can affect me? Do I beat them with a baseball bat? What do I need to do, and what are my responsibilities?
Well, the customer won't be winning any new business if they don't get that certification. So the only business they might have is business that they've already won the contracts for. And if they have that contract, then they're legal at that point. It's really for new contracts going forward. So I don't think there'd be any real worry, but your customer may not be bringing you any new, business because they won't be winning those new contracts.
Okay, so if they have current contracts, they're good. What about if a contract has to be rebid? Does that consider a new contract at that point?
Yeah.
Okay, so if I have one, it's a 2-year contract, they're coming up on 2 years, okay, and it goes out for rebid, now it's a new contract. What about if it's just renewed? Does it still require, since it's being renewed, as CMMC requirements are now in place, does that require CMMC compliance on a renewed contract?
Yeah, my understanding is that they're going to require that.
Okay.
Go ahead. Were you saying something, Kevin?
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say, you have to go to the contract terms, right? If those requirements are not written into the original contract and the contract renews as is with no additional language, the same terms apply. So any company that's already doing business with the federal government, and this is subject for another webinar that we're doing, you're gonna have to meet FAR compliance, federal acquisition regulations, which essentially says by award of the contract, you're meeting these 15 controls. Well, those same controls map to CMMC level 1 for the DFARS requirements. So if you're already meeting that, you should be in good shape.
Okay, so the message there is check your contracts.
Absolutely.
If it's renewing, which is you don't have to bid, or it's being rebid, read it carefully and know what needs to happen there. And that's also how you can guide your customers also to let them know, hey, you need to read this because it could cause a problem. So that's also guidance that you can provide.
Yeah.
This is a great question. It was one that we had talked about before. Has anyone see how this flows down to subcontractors and not just primary in terms of violation costs?
Yeah, whether you're a prime on a DoD contract or you're a subcontractor to a prime means you have to meet the requirements. So if that contract, if the contract for the prime, let's say, is to manufacture a weapon system, and you're manufacturing a small circuit board that goes into that weapon system, those technical drawings could be CUI. So you have a responsibility to meet those requirements. And oddly enough, we're starting to see that where primes are putting that language into subcontracts that you must meet the CMMC level 2 requirements, basically to get their business.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, the government or DoD is only dealing with their primes, but they're holding the primes responsible for making sure that those requirements are flowed down to any of their subs.
So really, at the end of the day, whether you're upstream, downstream, middle stream, or anywhere in between, if you have access, can read, or touch CUI, you're required no matter how far removed you are, you're required to be CMMC compliant if they are.
That's right.
Fair to say?
Yep. Sure.
Okay. If you're a smaller MSP, less than 10 employees, and you have only 1 or 2 customers that require CMMC, how do you recommend moving forward to make sure our customer is compliant? And what do we need to do internally to make it easier for them?
Well, I guess the first comment is that there's no relationship at all to the size of the company. So if the MSP is small or large, a company is small or large, that doesn't have any factor at all. That the government requires, if you're a company of 1 person or 1 million people, you still need to meet all the CMMC requirements. Of course, there's different approaches, which we'd be thrilled to talk to anyone about if they want to get into different approaches for different size companies. But the government's really tried hard to set up the program so that it can be complied with by any size company.
So bottom line is, it kind of goes back to what we were saying. Smaller company have 2 customers. If those customers have to be CMC level 2 compliant, there's a good chance not only does the MSP, but by the MSP doing that, they inherit said controls, so they don't have to do a bunch of extra work or spend a bunch of extra money doing that. Would that be a fair statement?
You're saying, Matt, if the MSP is compliant?
Yeah, what I'm saying is, if they have those customers, if they have to be CMMC compliant level 2, their customers, and they get compliant themselves, then in turn, they're actually helping their customers save money because they inherit those controls automatically and time doing that.
Yeah, it can greatly simplify the program for the customer if they can inherit the controls.
Okay, so it does benefit them in that way.
And it takes a lot of burden off the MSP, also not having to go through all the steps of the assessment every time.
Sure.
Yeah. Hey, let me give a quick example of a situation like that. So if somebody has their environment in Microsoft's GCC High, right? That's FedRAMP High. They're going to inherit all of the controls that Microsoft already has in place. Microsoft has documentation for it. So all of those controls are already going to be inherited. So the customer doesn't have to worry about those specific controls because they're going to inherit them from Microsoft. They still need the documentation, still have to do their documented policies, procedures, maintain that environment. So GCC High is a tool, but it does alleviate some of the burden from the customer for having to go through all of the controls. They just inherit what Microsoft already has in place.
So GCC High, for those that don't understand, is Microsoft Office 365 pretty much, and all those tools hosted in a specific way by Microsoft that it meets those compliance standards. And because your customer, whether you're selling it or not, is using that particular control, whatever those meet, are inherited because Microsoft's taking care of that for you.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So someone asked this, and it was one of the things we were going to talk about at the end here. So as an MSP, right, and as a customer, what are the first steps getting into compliance yourself? What are the steps? What's the length of process? How do I stay compliant?
Yeah, I think largely that goes back, Matt, to what I was originally talking about, where no matter how you ask that question, as long as you say, what's the first thing to do, it's always to define the scope.
Okay.
And the scope is fairly broad when it comes to CMMC, because like when they use the word asset, they just don't mean hardware and software. They mean people, facilities, service providers, you know, the big scope. But once you define that scope, then you can do the gap assessment. And it's kind of a flow through the process, but you always have to define the scope first. And I heard you mention also, how do you stay compliant? We actually offer a service for that to help the customer stay compliant. But you can think that the one of the keys to that whole program is building CMMC into your change management. So say you're compliant today, anything that changes could change that compliance. So you should make sure you're verifying the impact on CMMC every time something changes.
Okay.
Consistency is key, right? Once you get that level of compliance, you want to be consistent. Make sure you're still doing all of those same things. And as Wayne said, if there are changes, make sure that all of that is built into your change management program. So you've got the right documentation and you're maintaining what you've already built. You know, you don't build a house and then walk away from it and watch it crumble. There's maintenance that has to go on. CMMC is no different. It's a different house, still requires maintenance.
So I keep hearing this term on how MSPs can also make it slightly easier. Something called an enclave, and it's kind of like the PCI environments, I think, where you segment that off. Can you touch on what an enclave is and how that can help MSPs with their customers?
Sure. So an enclave is, think of it as a subset of your environment. It's a special subset that only people that are going to access CUI would have access to. Your CUI only exists in that environment, and it's not your entire organization. So it's highly controlled. And then it's also how you document that within your SSP. How do you define that enclave? Where are all the controls for that enclave? Because remember, it's only applicable for CMMC and for CUI. It's not all the other pieces of the business.
So, you know, and at the end of the day, I guess you could think of that in an easier term if that doesn't make sense. I know it's not the same, but almost like you're VLANing something off where it can't communicate with anything else. And now you're worried about that environment as opposed to the entire enterprise.
Right. So let's say you've got a company of 100 people, right? But only 10 people are accessing CUI. So all you do is you carve out that little area for them to operate in. Their machines operate on their own VLAN, or they have their own network. And you're highly controlling those systems. You don't need to do that for your whole organization. And that makes it so much easier for companies to become compliant, especially when it comes to maintenance. Now they don't have to worry about 100 people in their organization. They don't have to worry about their entire organization, all of the networks, all the switches. It's just that small subset that they can focus on, which makes it so much easier from a maintenance perspective when you get into year over year and having to attest that that environment is still compliant.
So I just heard blah, 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 money. That's what I heard as an MSP, right? I can make money because I have to now either VLAN something off or create an enclave, and that takes money.
Think of a enclave from an MSP perspective as an area where they can have all these CMMC controls. So think of it as you could charge more for customers that need to run in the CMMC compliant enclave, and your other customer, because you have to pay more, you have more controls there, you have to set up a special environment. So you could run the CMMC customers there, but run other customers in a less expensive, your normal standard environment.
Sure.
Great point, Wayne.
So if the customers are managed through our RMM platform, and the platform now in scope, or is now in scope, if the systems they're touching have CUI on it. So again, I'm using an RMM. I'm managing all of the customer. My RMM has access to CUI on their site. Is my RMM now in scope?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to look at the scope. So you're in scope if you're definitely accessing those CUI systems. If you're getting into the network segment with administrative rights where those systems are, or if you're in any way protecting those systems that have CUI. So any of those three scenarios could bring you into scope. And that's actually if you're protecting the systems, that is a special term. It's called a security protection asset. That's what they call you if you're an MSP and you're offering just protective services. But any of those, you're in scope.
So it's not my RMM that comes into scope, it's me, period, right? It's not a specific tool that becomes in scope as an MSP. If I'm touching that, securing it, have access to it, I as an MSP just became in scope.
Right.
Okay. Let's see. Got one more question. Oh, Mac versus PC. Doesn't matter?
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
Computer's a computer.
Okay. So it's about the data. It doesn't matter what it's stored on.
Right. If it stores, processes, or transmits CUI, it doesn't matter if it's a NUC box, if it's a Mac, doesn't matter.
Okay. The other thing is, and I'll just kind of confirm this, as one of my, I'm an MSP, my customer, they have to be audited every 3 years. Is that correct?
For level 2, there's a every 3-year certification by a external auditor who is a C3 PAO.
Okay.
Yeah, so every
They
3
need to
years.
stay in compliance, because the reality is otherwise they're going to be going out of their minds at that 3-year mark trying to get everything back again. But the actual audit is every 3 years.
Right.
That's right. And you have to attest every year. Someone in your management has to sign off that we're still compliant every year. So it's to your benefit to really stay up to par with that, because your executive's going to say, are you sure? Because I'm going to sign this. I don't know if everything's in place. Are you sure? So if you have the documentation that you're keeping everything in place, it's going to make your executive much more comfortable.
Okay. In your experience of assessments, readiness, et cetera, how many CRMA assets have you come into contact with?
Well, the CMRA assets, those are the assets that they shouldn't have CUI, but they could have CUI because they're on the same network. And those assets are plentiful. I mean, because there's a lot of systems that shouldn't have that information, but it could, because it's physically, there's a connection there. And those, just so people know, those kind of assets have to have the security controls of the company's normal security, not the CMMC controls.
Okay. So I know there's a range, from that standpoint. So from smaller in reference to the time it takes to much bigger, but on average, you guys have an idea of what an actual audit, not readiness, but the actual audit certification cost to go through?
Yeah, it's a wide range. We've heard as little as $25,000, as high as 60,000 plus.
But it depends on the size and scope, right?
Yeah. It depends on size and scope. And a lot of it comes down also to how you get ready for CMMC. Because if you use certain known like enclave approaches or certain readiness consultants that are really good, then you can get all your ducks in a row. So those C3 PAOs will charge less because they know that the assessment on their side is going to be easier.
Okay. I've got a few more questions, but does anybody out there have any more questions? Because I've run to the end of the questions there. Oh, okay, David. Kevin and Wayne, do you have any multi-factor authentication that you prefer to use, like Duo and other stuff like that? Do you have any ones that you prefer?
I don't have a preferred model. Go ahead, Kevin.
No, go ahead, finish.
I was just going to say that most of the MFA that we run into now seems to be the Microsoft MFA, especially if someone's going to use GCC High, because that's provided along with those tools. Okay. But MFA, you can potentially use any MFA as long as it provides the security of that control.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm the same. I don't have a preferred model. I want whatever works for the customer, right? They've got to decide what's best for them. Is it Duo? Is it Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator, Okta? Doesn't matter. Is it compliant? And does it work for the customer?
Okay. If as an MSP, I have a company that I manage, and they have said they just need to follow NIST 800-171 and self-attest front contracts, they are getting, but I feel like they would need CMMC level 2. How do I verify that? How can I help them with that?
Well, it's really the customer has to determine, do they have CUI? That's the biggest determining factor. If the contract says they just have to meet level 1, that's going to be pretty easy for them to do, because they're going to have to meet the, as I mentioned before, the FAR requirements for government contracts. So if they're meeting those, they're already going to meet CMMC level 1. It's critical that they have all of their documentation, that they've got evidence in case the DOJ comes knocking on their door. They want to be able to prove real quick that they've got everything and that they are compliant.
Okay.
But as the customer, they're going to have to determine, do they have access to CUI? Is the government sending any CUI information? If it is, it's going to be identified as a customer. If they're sending the DOD any technical drawings, things like that, that would fall in the CUI registry, then those would be CUI documents. So then, yes, they would have to meet level 2. Did I miss anything?
A lot of it is the customer's desire. So we have some customers that today only have FCI. They don't have the CUI, so they don't need to be level 2, but their company growth desire is to be able to participate in level 2 contract bids. So they're becoming compliant anyway, because they want to move that way.
Okay, I'm going to ask everybody, there are a couple more questions that we'll go back to, but I don't want to hold up everybody. I will ask that if you enjoyed this webinar, you give me 2 seconds just to tell us how we can help you. And then if you need to bolt, you can bolt. Nora, can I have that slide? So IGI Cybersecurity, as we said, we have 2 CCAs on staff. And whether you're an MSP or whether you have customers, we can do multiple things. One, if you have someone that needs a quote, you know they need to be level 2 or level 1 for that matter, we can do a readiness snapshot. It's an hour of consulting at no charge. The qualifications, though, are they want a quote, okay, and they need this service. But we will do a 1 hour at no charge to review what they need, how they need it. It's not a full gap assessment, but to help them understand everything. Next thing, CMMC readiness gap assessment, what it sounds like. We will come in and we will do the entire process. We will understand what they need to be, where they need to be, how they need to be there, help prepare the scope, guide you, if it's you and them, through how to get everything ready for that actual audit that they need to have. We also have a service, readiness white glove. And what that basically means is we'll hold their hand all the way through the audit. Literally everything from the first, call all the way through till they pass their audit. So those are services that we have available for that. If you need any more information, you've got Ken Barnaby at the bottom there. You can also reach out to me directly and I'll hook you up at matthew.koenig@igicyberlabs.com. And if you want to call, can't believe I'm doing this, but my phone number is 678-896-3234. Okay, we got a couple more questions, but for those of you that attended and need to go, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Hopefully we can help you in the future. If you have any further questions, reach out. We don't bite, and we're happy to answer your questions. We're also happy to help you sell deals. Whole different story. Question. I heard that all Kaseya platforms are not admissible, and that is we have to stay within the FedRAMP approved platforms and software because they sail through quicker. Is that correct? Now, I know you don't know necessarily about Kaseya's platform, but is it correct that if you're dealing with FedRAMP approved platforms and software, that it makes it a lot easier?
Yeah, if those systems are already meeting FedRAMP moderate equivalent or FedRAMP high, then it just makes everything much easier, much faster. Otherwise, you've got to go to the vendor like Kaseya, and they're going to have to provide the documentation that shows how they're meeting the compliance requirements. So if they can't provide those, it's going to be an uphill battle.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions we have. Everybody, I appreciate you sticking around longer than the actual time. Again, please reach out if you have any questions, concerns, customers that need to you need help with. We're happy to help get everything situated. We're happy to help you define scopes. We're happy to help you sell the deal. Whatever you need, we're here to assist you.
Yep.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Wayne. Appreciate you being here today. I know you guys are really busy. There will be a follow-up email coming out with the recording, probably tomorrow sometime. So you will get a copy of the recording. And again, appreciate it. Thanks so much, everybody. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. See ya.